I swear I can still see that smirk when I close my eyes. The kind of smile someone gives when they've already won a game you didn't even know you were playing. She stood in the doorway with her suitcase half zipped, her hair still damp from the shower she took in our bathroom. No explanation, no fear, not even a hint of hesitation. Just that cold, satisfied curve of her lips as she said, "I'm leaving. I should have done this a long time ago." Then she turned and walked out like she was stepping into a taxi, not walking out of a marriage. No shouting, no tears, no dramatic fight. Just a smirk. And me, standing barefoot in the hallway like an idiot, trying to figure out if this was some insane joke, or if I was actually losing the woman I thought I knew better than anyone. But the weirdest part? I didn't feel heartbreak first. I felt confusion. A deep, painful confusion that settled between my ribs and made it hard to breathe. Everything had been normal hours earlier. We had breakfast together, joked about weekend plans, even had sex 2 nights before. Not marriage on the edge sex either. Real, intimate, familiar. She kissed my neck like she always did. Her hands moved over my back like nothing was wrong. There was no sign she'd already packed half her life in a suitcase hidden in the closet. So when the door clicked shut behind her, my first stupid instinct was to open it and call her back, ask what the hell she meant. But before I could take a step, I felt someone behind me. It was Lena, my wife's best friend. She didn't look smug. She looked guilty, nervous, the opposite of the cold hurricane that had just walked out of my house. She took a slow breath, stepped closer, and whispered, "If only you knew why she really left." Those words hit me harder than the leaving itself. Because if someone says that, it means there's a story, a hidden one, and it's never good. "Lena," I said, "what do you mean? What happened? Did she meet someone?" Her eyes flicked to the door, like she expected my wife to storm back in. "No," she said quickly. "It's not that. It's something worse, and I can't tell you everything yet." That pissed me off. My entire life had just blown up and she wanted to play cryptic messenger? "Tell me now," I demanded. "I deserve at least that." But she shook her head. "You're not ready for it. You need to see it first. You need proof." "What proof? Why can't you just tell me?" "Because," she whispered, "she's been planning this for months. And she didn't leave you for love. She left you for business." Business. The word felt wrong, ugly, too calculated for a marriage. Lena started pacing, running her hands through her hair like she was fighting with herself. I watched her, trying to understand why she seemed almost as shaken as I was. She looked at me with this strange mix of fear and something else, something softer, something she quickly hid. "You think she's the woman you married," Lena said. "But she hasn't been that woman for a long time." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about?" "She didn't leave because of a fight, or because she stopped loving you overnight. She left because her plan is almost complete. And you were part of that plan." The way she said, "part of that plan," made my skin crawl. Not a partner, not a husband, a piece, a tool, a placeholder in a strategy I didn't know existed. Lena stepped closer again. Her voice softened. "I want to help you, but you need to trust me. There are things in your house, things she hid, that will explain everything. You need to find them. Then you'll understand why she left with that smirk." I didn't know who to trust anymore. My wife had just detonated our marriage and walked out like a villain in a movie. And now her best friend was telling me there was some hidden agenda behind it, something worse than cheating, something she couldn't even say out loud yet. But the look in Lena's eyes, that wasn't the look of someone lying. It was the look of someone scared of the truth. So I swallowed hard and said the only thing I could. "Show me where to start." Lena nodded slowly, and her next words chilled me more than my wife's smirk ever could. "Check her drawer, the one she told you never to touch." I remember following Lena down the hallway, both of us moving slowly, like every step might set off something neither of us was prepared for. The house felt different without my wife in it, hollow in a way that didn't match the quiet. Lena kept glancing over her shoulder as if the walls themselves might be listening, and the tension between us kept building, pulling tighter and tighter like a wire that could snap with the slightest pull. When we reached the bedroom, she stopped, placing her hand on the doorknob, and she took this long breath that made her shoulders rise almost to her ears before she finally pushed the door open and gestured toward the dresser with a heaviness that made my throat tighten. I walked inside, telling myself that this was ridiculous, that I was letting paranoia and heartbreak twist everything into something bigger than it was. But then I saw the bottom drawer, the one my wife always closed quietly whenever I entered the room, and my chest tightened because I suddenly realized I had never questioned her secrecy until now. When I pulled the drawer open, I expected something small, something stupid, maybe old letters or keepsakes she was embarrassed about. But instead, there were folders stacked too neatly, a second phone wrapped in a scarf like it was something precious, and a USB drive taped under the wooden divider like she'd rehearsed hiding it. Lena didn't say anything at first. She just watched me, arms crossed, biting her lower lip like she was bracing for me to explode. I lifted the second phone, feeling its weight in my hand and realizing how unfamiliar it felt, cold and distant, as if it belonged to someone I had never met. There was no passcode, which made my stomach drop even lower, because if she didn't bother protecting it from me, it meant she was sure she'd be gone before I found it. The messages weren't romantic or sexual, they were far worse. Transaction logs, conversations about moving the money soon, and references to something called Plan B. I scrolled through thread after thread, reading lines that made my head spin, words like risk, accounts, incubation, and the most gut-wrenching of all, he won't fight it. He never does. I looked at Lena with a mix of horror and disbelief, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice in this slow, heavy way that made every syllable feel like it weighed a pound. She told me my wife had been using the marriage as a shield, a prop, a safe and respectable mask so her online activities wouldn't raise suspicion, and while some part of me wanted to argue that the woman I married couldn't possibly have done something like this, another part of me, a quieter but sharper part, knew exactly how capable she was of reinvention and manipulation when it benefited her. Lena reached out and touched my arm gently, almost like she was testing whether I would pull away, and the warmth of her hand was startling after scrolling through the cold messages on that burner phone. She whispered that my wife had been planning to leave for months, that every little smile, every kiss on the cheek, every casual touch had been calculated to keep me blind until the moment she slipped away with everything she needed. I asked Lena why she was telling me this, why she wasn't leaving like everyone else seemed to do whenever my life fell apart, and she looked down at the floor before answering, her voice trembling just enough that I could tell the words had been sitting inside her for too long. She said she had tried to stop my wife more than once, that she had warned her the plan would collapse, that using people always leads to consequences. But my wife never listened because she believed she was smarter than everyone else, especially me. She admitted she felt guilty, not because she had participated, she insisted she hadn't, but because she had known pieces of the truth and didn't tell me sooner, thinking she could fix everything before it spiraled. When she finally looked up at me, there was this raw honesty in her eyes that made me feel exposed and strangely grounded, like she was offering me something solid in a moment where everything else was slipping from my hands. I wanted to ask her more, to demand she tell me every detail she was hiding, but she shook her head slowly, telling me that the truth was layered, that there were still things I needed to see with my own eyes before she could explain the rest. She warned me that my wife didn't leave for another man, which I had assumed would be the worst-case scenario. Instead, she left for something far more calculated, far more self-serving, something that didn't involve love or betrayal in the romantic sense, but something rooted in opportunity, greed, and the growing threat of getting caught. Every time Lena tried to say more, she stopped herself, pressing her fingers to her mouth like the words tasted dangerous. She said this wasn't about infidelity or emotional distance. It wasn't even about wanting a different life. It was about escaping a situation she created, one that was starting to crumble, one she didn't want to be around for when everything finally collapsed. Standing there with the second phone in my hand and Lena's breath trembling against the quiet of the room, I began to understand that my wife's smirk wasn't just cruel, it was triumphant, deliberate, and rehearsed. It was the smile of someone who believed she had pulled off the perfect escape. But as Lena finally stepped back and told me we needed to keep looking, that this drawer was only the beginning, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage yet, not revenge, but something colder, sharper, the first crack of awakening. I realized I had no idea who I had been married to, but I was about to find out. When Lena told me we hadn't even scratched the surface, I felt this cold heaviness settle inside my chest, the kind that makes you wonder if you're about to discover something that will change the way you remember every moment of your marriage. She moved around the bedroom with this uneasy familiarity, like she had spent more time here than a best friend should, running her fingers along the edges of drawers, checking the underside of shelves, searching for whatever she already knew was hidden. I followed her silently for a few seconds before I finally spoke, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. Lena, if you know where she kept things, just tell me everything now, because this half-revealed nightmare is worse than anything you could possibly say. She stopped, resting her hand on the dresser, and turned to me with eyes that looked equal parts guilty and terrified. I will, she whispered, but you have to understand that I didn't know the full picture either, not until recently, and when I finally did, she was already too far gone. The longer I looked at the drawer, the more I realized how carefully organized it was, almost too carefully, as if my wife had curated a display meant to be found after her departure. Not by accident, but as part of whatever story she wanted to craft. Inside, beneath the burner phone I had already examined, were envelopes filled with bank statements under different names, some belonging to people I'd never heard of, and others that sent a sharp jolt through me because I recognized them from stories my wife had told. Stories about clients, acquaintances, people she had supposedly helped or consulted. I lifted one envelope slowly, letting the papers slide out, and I stared at the transfers, money moving inconsistently but frequently, bouncing between small accounts, each withdrawal under the threshold that would trigger a bank's attention. It was precise, almost surgical. I whispered, "This doesn't look like someone stumbling into trouble. This looks like someone who knows exactly what they're doing." And Lena exhaled sharply, pressing her hand to her forehead in a way that made it very clear she had hoped I wouldn't see the pattern so quickly. As I examined the next set of documents, I noticed handwritten notes tucked between the pages, short phrases, dates, numbers, reminders in my wife's handwriting that suddenly felt like the handwriting of a stranger. I held one note up to the light and read aloud, "Move it before the deadline. Don't mix with household. L won't suspect." And my throat tightened because the L could have meant Lena, but it just as easily could have meant me, my name, my life, my stability reduced to a single initial in a secret memo. Lena stepped closer, almost too close, and placed her fingers lightly on the corner of the note, guiding it down. "She used people as placeholders," she said in this low, pained voice. "She used you because you looked stable, responsible, safe. She used me because I trusted her and didn't question things at first. I only realized how deep she'd gone when she stopped hiding her confidence about it. She genuinely believed nothing could touch her." There was a tremor in her voice that felt more personal than fear, something like disappointment mixed with a hint of shame. I tried to breathe, but the more I looked through the drawer, the heavier everything felt. Underneath the notes and statements was a thin leather folder with a label that simply read, B. I hesitated before opening it, but Lena nodded, urging me silently. Inside were screenshots printed out. Why she printed them instead of hiding them digitally, I didn't know. But the conversations were unmistakably damning. Some were with women who seemed to be coordinating with her, others with people asking about deliveries and drops, and one with someone who wrote, "If he gets curious, we'll need plan B," followed by my wife replying, "He won't. He never does." I said the words out loud, slowly, letting each one slice through the last bit of naivety I had left. He never does. Lena closed her eyes when I repeated it, like hearing the sentence hurt her too. After a moment, she said, "She underestimated you because you made her feel comfortable, and she mistook your kindness for blindness." I placed the folder down and took a step back, trying to keep my voice steady. "Lena, there's more you're not telling me. I can feel it. You knew about this drawer. You knew about the phone. You knew where to look. How involved were you?" Her breath caught in her throat, and she held my gaze with this raw, defensive determination. "I wasn't part of it," she said slowly. "Not directly. At first, I thought she was just venting when she talked about moving money or using connections. I told myself she was exaggerating, that everyone bends the truth a little when they're stressed. But when I realized what she was actually doing, I confronted her. I told her to stop. She told me I was too scared to live boldly, that I was jealous, that you were just her stepping stone into a life where she didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't tell you earlier because I genuinely thought I could get through to her before she dragged everyone into her mess." The silence between us grew thick, pulsing like something alive. I finally asked, "Why are you helping me now?" And she moved closer, lowering her voice as if the answer might unravel us both. "Because," she whispered, "she didn't just betray you, she betrayed me too. And I'm done protecting someone who never protected anyone." There was a moment where her hand brushed mine, almost accidentally, but not entirely so, and I felt the tension shift into something more complicated. Anger, longing, betrayal, something brewing in the spaces between us that neither of us dared acknowledge yet. Before I could speak again, Lena said something that made my stomach twist into a hard knot. "This isn't the worst of it. Someone else is involved. Someone she trusted even more than me. And they're not going to let you walk away from this without trying to cover their tracks first." And when she said that, when I saw the fear flicker behind her eyes, I finally understood that my wife leaving wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous, and the secrets in that drawer were only the first cracks in the facade. We spent nearly an hour going through every document, every strange transaction, every cryptic note, until the bedroom felt less like a place where I had shared a life with my wife, and more like a crime scene I had been living in without realizing it. The air felt heavy, pulsing with the kind of tension that makes your skin prickle before your mind even understands why. Lena moved quietly beside me, sometimes reaching out to steady herself on the edge of the dresser, as if the revelations were physically exhausting her. I watched her for a moment and finally said, "You still haven't told me everything, Lena. You keep stopping yourself like you're afraid I'll push you away if you say too much." She looked up slowly and met my eyes with an expression that was both fragile and fiercely loyal. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "but not of you. I'm afraid of what happens when all of this comes out, because your wife wasn't acting alone, and some of the people she worked with won't want loose ends running around." Before I could respond, we heard a soft thud from downstairs, too loud to be the house settling, too purposeful to be an accident. Lena's eyes widened, and she grabbed my wrist with surprising force, her fingers digging in just enough to make me understand this wasn't panic. It was recognition. Something in her expression told me this wasn't unexpected. Not entirely. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice trembling with urgency even though she fought to keep it steady. "Just listen." We stood frozen in the bedroom, straining to catch any sound beneath the pounding of our own heartbeat. Another noise followed, a deliberate shuffle, the creak of a floorboard near the living room, the soft scrape of something being moved. Not rummaging, searching. I leaned toward her and whispered, "Who would be here? Who would break in now?" And she shook her head slowly, her breath brushing my cheek as she spoke. "Someone who knows what's in this house. Someone who doesn't want you finding it." I wanted to ask her how she knew, how she could be so certain, but before I could form the question, a louder crash echoed from downstairs, the distinct sound of something heavy being knocked over, like a piece of furniture shoved aside to get better access to something behind it. Lena flinched and grabbed my arm again. "We need to stay up here," she whispered, "not confront them. They're not here to hurt you. They're here to take something." Her certainty terrified me more than the sounds themselves. I whispered back, "You know exactly what they're taking, don't you?" And she nodded once, slowly, as if admitting the truth was equal parts relief and dread. "Her laptop," she said. "The old one. The one she stopped using months ago. It's the only thing she couldn't destroy without drawing attention." I stared at her, trying to process how deeply she was entangled in this story I hadn't even known existed. "Lena," I whispered, "how do you know they'll only take that? How do you know they won't come up here?" She closed her eyes and answered in a voice that vibrated with vulnerability. "Because this isn't about you. Not yet. They don't want confrontation. They want evidence. And they're terrified that you might already have copies." We listened as the intruder moved through the house with frightening precision. No hesitation, no random searching. Whoever it was had been here before or had been told exactly where to look. Drawers opened and closed. Cabinets creaked. The old desk in the corner was yanked open with a force that rattled the floorboards beneath our feet. Lena's grip tightened around my arm when we heard the metallic click of the safe I had never used, the one my wife insisted we keep for emergencies. It was empty now, but the person downstairs didn't know that yet. After a moment, their movements shifted direction, heading straight for the guest room, where my wife had kept her old laptop in a box labeled tax documents. We didn't breathe until the front door opened again, this time quietly, the way someone leaves after finishing a job they were instructed to do. When the lock clicked shut and silence returned to the house, Lena let out a long, shaky breath and finally released my arm. "They're gone," she said softly, but her voice didn't sound relieved, more resigned, as if she had expected this moment for far longer than she wanted to admit. I turned to her slowly and said, "Now you're going to tell me everything, Lena. No more half-truths. No more warnings without explanations. You're going to tell me why my house was just broken into, who took that laptop, and what the hell my wife was involved in." The way she looked at me then, like she was standing on the edge of a cliff with no good choices left, made me realize that whatever she was about to reveal would change everything I thought I understood. She walked toward the bed, sat down heavily, and whispered, "Your wife wasn't just planning to leave you. She was planning to disappear, and the people she worked with need to make sure there's no trail leading back to them." She paused, swallowed hard, and looked up at me with an expression so raw it made my breath catch. "And this break-in? This was only the beginning, because now that they know you've looked inside that drawer, they'll assume you've seen more than you have." Before I could speak, she added something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. "And trust me, there are things you haven't seen yet, things she hid even from me, and once you find them, you'll understand why she left Smirking." I didn't sleep that night. Lena didn't either. We stayed in the living room with the lights low, not speaking for long stretches of time, both of us processing the fact that someone had walked through my home with purpose, certainty, and the confidence of a person who knew exactly what they needed to take. At some point, my exhaustion started slipping into something sharper, more dangerous. Not rage yet, but the early shape of it, the kind that forms when betrayal becomes undeniable and humiliation starts burning hot in your chest. Lena watched me from across the room, her eyes following every shift in my posture. And finally she said, "You're holding everything in because you think falling apart makes you weak, but I need you to let yourself react, even if it's just for a minute, before I tell you the rest." I looked at her, at the way she sat with her knees drawn slightly together, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles were white. And I saw that she wasn't just afraid for me. She was afraid of the truth she had been carrying alone for too long. When she finally stood and walked toward me, her steps were slow and careful, like she didn't want to startle me out of whatever numb state I was stuck in. She sat beside me, close enough that I felt the warmth of her body against my side, something grounding that I didn't realize I needed. "We need access to her cloud backup," she said in a voice that trembled with restrained urgency. She kept everything there: screenshots, files, conversations, bank access. She thought using the cloud made her untouchable because she assumed no one would know what accounts she was hiding. My breath caught when she said that, because the idea of my wife casually storing evidence of whatever she had been doing in the cloud felt both reckless and terrifying. "How do we get in?" I asked, my voice low, strained. Lena swallowed, looking away for a moment before answering. She used the same email for her secret accounts. Different usernames, different numbers, but the same recovery email. And I know the password she used back when we were in college. She never changed it. It should have felt like a violation, logging into my wife's private life. But after everything we had found, after learning she had used my life as a shield, it felt almost righteous to peel back every layer she had built around her lies. When I opened the laptop Lena had brought, the login screen for the backup appeared almost instantly, and with a shaky breath she typed the password. It worked. Suddenly folders filled the screen, thousands of files organized meticulously. Clients, transactions, correspondence, assets, archives, and a final one labeled simply, "Exit." I clicked correspondence first, because I needed to understand who she had been talking to. What I saw pulled the floor out from under me in a way I didn't think was possible after everything I'd already discovered. The messages weren't romantic. They weren't reflective of some hidden affair or emotional entanglement. They were cold, calculated, transactional. Conversations with wealthy men, older, vulnerable, lonely, men she had flattered, praised, and carefully manipulated into sending money, gifts, connections, investments, all under different personas she created. She hadn't just lived online. She had built a second version of herself there, one that knew exactly how to coax trust out of men who had too much money and too little companionship. Her messages were filled with practiced intimacy, just enough sexual suggestion to hook them, never enough to expose her identity. I read lines where she promised late-night calls, where she teased the idea of meeting, where she described fantasies with clinical precision, all crafted to give the illusion of desire without crossing into something that might expose her. It wasn't cheating in the traditional sense. It was manipulation as a business model. Lena leaned over my shoulder, her presence warm but tense, and said quietly, "This is what she never wanted you to see. She wasn't leaving you for someone else. She was leaving because she didn't need the safety net anymore. Her persona online became bigger than her real life, and she decided she didn't want to share any part of the reward." I kept scrolling, my pulse skipping every time a message mentioned timelines, deadlines, withdrawals. In one thread, a man wrote, "If you disappear again, I'll have to report the transactions." And my wife responded, "Relax. Everything is under control. I'm finalizing the last step. After that, he won't be a problem." I stared at that line for a long time because I wasn't sure what he meant, me or one of the men she'd manipulated. Neither option made sense, and both options terrified me. As I scrolled further, I found a folder inside Exit that contained recordings, audio files of conversations she had with some of these men, her voice low and sultry, but sharpened with calculation. Lena closed her eyes as one of the recordings played softly, shaking her head. "I told her she was playing with fire," she whispered. "I told her someone would eventually push back, someone smart enough to trace the money or demand accountability. That's why she started planning her disappearance. She knew her time was running out." My hands were trembling now, not from fear but from anger. Anger at being used as her cover, her alibi, her respectable married facade that shielded her from suspicion. She needed to look stable, grounded, trustworthy, and I had unknowingly been the prop she leaned on while she built a world of lies behind my back. I closed the laptop slowly, letting the silence stretch between us. After a moment, I asked Lena, "Was this why she left Smirking? Because she thought she'd gotten away with everything?" Lena nodded, but there was hesitation in her eyes as she whispered, That's part of it, but not the entire reason. Her voice deepened then, filled with dread. There's another layer to this, something she hid even from me, something that will hurt you more than this, and you need to be prepared. I felt something electric shift in the room, a mixture of anticipation and fear, and before I could ask her what she meant, she added softly, "And this is only the first twist. The real one comes later." The next morning, the sun came through the windows in these soft, innocent rays that made the house look normal again, almost peaceful, as if the night before had been just a bad dream. But the peace didn't reach me. It didn't reach Lena either. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the laptop between us like a silent witness to everything we had uncovered. Lena traced the rim of her coffee cup with her finger, her shoulders tight, her eyes unfocused, and I could tell she was rehearsing what she needed to say next, the words gathering behind her teeth like something sharp she didn't want to hand me but knew she had no choice. When the knock came at the door, it wasn't loud. It wasn't violent. It was the kind of knock someone uses when they already know the person inside is awake and tense and listening. Lena froze, her hand halfway lifted, her eyes snapping to mine with an expression I had never seen on her. It wasn't fear exactly. It was something colder, something like dread mixed with the last sliver of hope that she might be wrong. I didn't move at first. I just listened as the person outside knocked again. 3 slow taps, deliberate and calm. Finally I stood, swallowing the knot in my throat as I walked toward the door. Before I could touch the handle, Lena whispered, "Please, don't assume it's good news." The man on the doorstep wasn't who I expected. Not a cop, not a neighbor, not someone looking to return a misplaced package. He looked put together, business casual in a way that felt off for a house visit, with a leather briefcase tucked under his arm and a forced professional smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Are you Mr. Avery?" he asked, and the tone he used wasn't the tone of someone wondering. It was the tone of someone confirming. I nodded, and he stepped forward slightly, clearly wanting to enter but waiting for permission so he could claim he had been welcomed in voluntarily. "I'm representing a client who needs to discuss a matter regarding financial damages and potential fraud," he said, pulling a folded document from his briefcase with too much practiced ease. "Your name came up in several records tied to online transactions. It's urgent we speak." I didn't invite him in. I didn't have to. The shock must have been written across my face because he softened his voice, lowering it like he was delivering condolences rather than accusations. "My client is willing to settle privately," he said, "but if this continues without resolution, there may be legal consequences that will affect both you and your wife." When he said "your wife," there was a subtle shift in his expression, the tiniest flicker of disdain, as if he already knew she was gone and found the idea personally unprofessional. "We have reason to believe," he continued, "that funds were allocated through your household accounts. Whether or not you were aware of her activities is something we can discuss later, but ignorance, unfortunately, does not relieve responsibility." I swear my vision dimmed for a moment. "Are you telling me," I said slowly, "that she ran her operations through accounts with my name on them?" He didn't hesitate, didn't blink. "In part. Enough to be concerning. Enough to imply complicity." That last word hit me like a punch. Complicity. A word people use in courtrooms. A word that sticks to reputations like tar. Behind me, I heard Lena's quiet intake of breath from the kitchen doorway, but she didn't speak, didn't move, didn't rescue me. She just watched, her eyes darting between me and the man on the porch. I asked him who his client was, but he refused to answer. "That will be revealed through official channels," he said, his voice clipped now, impatient. "I'm here simply to inform you that we are pursuing resolution. If you cooperate, this can be handled discreetly. If not, we'll have to proceed formally." And then he handed me the document, nodded once like he had just delivered a weather report, and walked away without giving me another second to process the grenade he had lobbed into my life. When I closed the door, my hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped the paper. Lena rushed to me, placing her hand over mine, steadying it as she whispered, I'm so sorry. I didn't know he'd move this fast. I turned to her, anger simmering beneath my skin like something boiling. How did he even know where to find me? How did he know my name? She hesitated, and that hesitation was enough to tell me she knew more than she had admitted. Your wife wasn't careful, she said finally. She used your home address as a safety net because it looked legitimate, respectable, stable. It made the transactions look less suspicious. It made her look like she had a normal married life, not like someone who was manipulating vulnerable people for money. She paused, her voice cracking. And when things started getting complicated, she made sure you looked responsible for anything that went wrong. I stared at her, unable to form words because the betrayal suddenly felt so much bigger than deception or secret accounts. It felt strategic. My wife hadn't just walked out. She'd positioned me as the fall guy, the clean-cut husband who would look guilty enough to shoulder the fallout while she vanished with everything she'd siphoned from her victims. The realization made my stomach twist, and I pressed my hand against the countertop to steady myself. She planned this, I whispered. She smirked because she knew I'd be left holding the wreckage. Lena stepped closer, her voice low, trembling. That's why I'm here, she said. Not just because I feel guilty, but because I am not letting you go down for something she masterminded. I know the players. I know her pattern. I know how she covered her tracks. And I know she's not done yet. She reached out then, placing her hand on my chest, just over my heartbeat, and there was a moment, brief, electric, undeniably charged, where neither of us moved, neither of us breathed, neither of us pretended that there wasn't something building between us, something born from shared fear and raw truth. But then she pulled back, drawing in a shaky breath. This isn't just about stopping her, she said. This is about exposing her before she destroys you completely. And for the first time since she left, I felt something solid forming inside me. Not strength, not yet, but the first spark of resolve. Lena didn't speak for a long time after that moment in the kitchen, and neither did I. The silence between us grew thick with all the words she hadn't said, all the truths hovering between us like smoke waiting for a spark. She walked slowly into the living room and sat down on the edge of the sofa, her posture tight, her hands clasped together in a way that made her look both defensive and exposed, as if she was bracing for a confrontation she had delayed for far too long. I stayed standing, leaning against the counter, holding the legal notice the man had left like it was a ticking device. My wife had built the perfect trap, one designed not to destroy me quickly, but to let me unravel slowly, piece by piece, until I was the one left explaining her crimes. After several minutes, Lena finally broke the silence, her voice low and threaded with exhaustion. You keep looking at me like you're waiting for the other shoe to drop, she said, her eyes fixed on her hands. And you're right to. There's something I haven't told you, something I've been terrified to say because once I say it, everything changes. I walked toward her slowly, the room echoing with every step, and I sat down across from her, placing the paper on the coffee table with more force than I intended. Then say it, I told her, my voice thick but steady, because right now it feels like I'm drowning in pieces of a story everyone else understands but me. She looked up at me then, and the expression in her eyes was pure devastation. Not guilt, not calculation, but the kind of pain you see in someone who's reached the end of a secret they can't carry anymore. Your wife didn't start alone, she whispered. She had people guiding her, people who taught her how to build the persona, how to choose the right targets, how to launder the money through layers that were hard to trace. And I was there at the beginning, not as a conspirator, not as someone participating, but as someone who should have said something long before it reached this point. Her admission cracked something open inside me, a mix of anger and disbelief and a deep ache I didn't want to acknowledge. So you knew? I asked quietly, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it steady. You knew she was manipulating people? You knew she was building this world behind my back, and you didn't tell me? Lena shook her head quickly, reaching out as if to take my hand but stopping herself inches before touching me. "Not like that," she said, the words spilling out in long, tangled sentences. When she first started, she made it seem harmless. Exaggerations, flirtation, small amounts of money that she claimed were just gifts or tips from clients she helped with personal projects. I told myself it was messy but not harmful, that she was just finding ways to feel empowered, that she wouldn't cross lines that would hurt anyone. And when I realized she was crossing those lines anyway, I confronted her. Many times. But she kept shutting me out, telling me I was jealous, telling me I was too cautious, too moral, too afraid to take risks the way she did. I tried to intervene before any of this happened, but she didn't listen. She said she didn't need me anymore. She said she didn't need anyone. Her voice cracked on the last words, and for a moment the room felt unbearably small. I exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of my neck as the anger burned hotter, but beneath it, something more complicated stirred, because as furious as I was, I could see the truth in her eyes. This wasn't a woman who had conspired against me. This was someone who had been swept into the gravitational pull of my wife's ambition and had finally broken free just in time to see the wreckage it left behind. "Why come to me now?" I asked, leaning forward, my elbows on my knees. "Why help me now when you could have protected yourself by walking away like everyone else did?" Lena closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, they glistened with something painfully honest. "Because she didn't just lie to you," she said. "She lied to me too. She used me, manipulated me, made me believe I was helping her chase independence when really I was just helping her build the perfect escape route. I cared about her more than she ever cared about either of us. And when she finally told me her plan, the real plan, the one where she disappears and leaves you carrying everything, something in me snapped. I couldn't protect her anymore. I couldn't be part of her silence. I couldn't let you walk straight into a collapse you never saw coming." Something shifted in her tone then, something deeper than guilt. She leaned closer, her voice dropping, warm and trembling, and it felt almost intimate despite the weight of the confession. "But the truth is, that isn't the only reason I'm here." She paused, searching my face with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "There were moments," she said softly. "Small ones, quiet ones, where I saw the way you looked at her, the kindness you gave her without conditions, the loyalty you gave her without demands, and I realized how much she took for granted, and I realized how much I—" She stopped herself abruptly, inhaling sharply as if she had revealed too much. I felt the air between us shift, charged with something fragile and dangerous. "Lena," I said quietly, "what did she tell you before she left? What was the real plan?" Her eyes darkened with something like fear. "She said she needed to disappear entirely," Lena whispered. "Not just from you, but from everyone. She said the walls were closing in, that she'd built too much, manipulated too many, and she needed to cut herself out before someone connected the dots. And the worst part is, she planned to let all of the dots point to you." The words hit me like a punch, and for a moment the room felt tilted, the air too thin to breathe. I looked at Lena, my voice low and raw. "So she leaves smiling because she thinks she's untouchable, and she thinks I'm too blind to fight back." Lena reached out then, this time not stopping herself, and her fingers brushed mine. Not an accident, not a comfort, but a promise. "She thinks she knows you," she whispered, "but she has no idea what you're capable of when someone pushes you too far." Her touch lingered for one heartbeat longer than it should have, and in that moment, something inside me solidified. Something cold, focused, unyielding. The air between us shifted after Lena's confession, thick with everything she had finally said, and everything she had stopped herself from admitting. For a brief moment, sitting there on the couch with her hand brushing mine, I felt something stabilizing, like the chaos around us had finally crystallized into a path forward. But the thing about chaos is that it rarely stays still, and deep down I think I already sensed it before it happened. that the worst part of this story wasn't over yet, that there were still cracks beneath the truth Lena had given me, cracks that hid something darker she still hadn't told me. I didn't expect the next blow to come the way it did, though. Not quietly, not gradually, but like a trapdoor opening beneath my feet after I'd finally convinced myself the ground was solid. Later that evening, after hours spent studying my wife's files and cross-referencing the scattered pieces of her schemes, I stepped into the kitchen to grab some water. Lena followed slowly, leaning against the doorframe with the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept right in weeks. I could feel her eyes on me, watching the way I flipped through the documents, the tension in my shoulders, the way my jaw clenched every time I found proof that my wife had used me as her legal buffer. "You're spiraling," Lena said softly behind me, her voice warm but strained. "You're trying to find the one piece that makes sense of all this, but you won't. Not tonight. You need rest." I turned to her, rubbing the back of my neck. "Rest doesn't help when someone's about to ruin my life on paper," I said, trying to hold on to my composure even as fatigue clawed at me. She stepped closer, placing her hand gently on my arm. "You're not alone in this," she said quietly, her thumb brushing my skin with a tenderness I wasn't prepared for. "I won't let her destroy you." Her eyes searched mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. It wasn't purely sympathy. There was something else there, something warm and complicated and very real. And for a moment I let myself lean into that warmth, into the idea that maybe someone was finally on my side. I didn't expect the moment to break so violently. It happened when my phone vibrated on the counter, an email notification from an address I didn't recognize. At first I ignored it, assuming it was another debt collector or bank alert triggered by the earlier visit. But Lena's gaze flicked toward the phone faster than mine did, and something in her expression, just a flicker of panic, barely a twitch, sent a cold spark down my spine. I picked up the phone slowly, unlocking the screen while keeping my eyes on her. She tried to hide her reaction, tucking her hair behind her ear and stepping back as if nothing was wrong, but it was too late. Something inside me had already shifted. The email was short, no greeting, no signature, just a name in the subject line, my wife's, and an attached zip folder. For a full second I just stared at it, my pulse lifting in my throat as I considered whether to open it. Lena's voice broke the silence first. "Don't," she said abruptly, her voice cracking. When I looked up, she had gone pale. "It could be dangerous. Malware. A trap. You don't know who sent it." But the desperation in her voice didn't match the reasoning. She wasn't worried about malware. She was worried about the content. I opened the email anyway. Inside the zip folder were screenshots, hundreds of them, of conversations between Lena and my wife. Not recent ones, older ones. Messages discussing clients, methods, approaches, and even drafts of profiles they had created together. Conversations about how to optimize responses to the men my wife manipulated. Instructions Lena had given her about what type of messages got the biggest emotional reactions, what kind of fabricated vulnerability led to bigger transfers, how to anchor trust with voice notes. With every screenshot I opened, my stomach tightened further, until I felt like something was tearing inside me. I heard Lena whisper my name behind me, soft, strangled, but I kept scrolling. More messages, more evidence, more proof that Lena hadn't just been passively involved at the beginning. She had been instrumental. She had helped structure the model, helped craft the strategy. She wasn't a bystander. She was an architect. Finally, I turned to her, holding the phone with a grip so tight my knuckles were white. "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper but sharp enough to make her flinch. "How long were you helping her?" Lena shook her head violently, taking a step toward me with her palms raised as if approaching a wounded animal. "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "You're seeing pieces taken out of context. She manipulated me too. She pulled me in before I understood what she was planning. I didn't know how far she would go." I pulled the phone back when she tried to reach for it. "But you helped her," I said, the anger rising slowly, dangerously. You helped her build the lies she used to trap these men. You helped her create the persona she used to scam people. And then you came here, pretending you were just the friend who tried to stop her? Lena's face twisted with pain, and tears gathered in her eyes. I backed out, she whispered. I backed out before it got dark, before it became what you saw in those files. She didn't tell me everything. She hid the worst parts from me. I swear to you, I tried to get her to stop. I tried to pull away. I tried to warn you. By hiding everything? I snapped. By waiting until my house was raided? By letting me walk into a legal ambush you knew was coming? She covered her mouth with her hand, shaking her head, her voice muffled by her own desperation. I thought I could fix it before you got pulled in. I thought I could keep you safe. I didn't know it would come to this. I didn't know she would turn on me too. The room felt like it was tilting again, but this time it wasn't from shock. It was from the bitter sting of realizing I had trusted the wrong person twice. My wife and Lena had been two halves of the same strategy at the start. Even if Lena had backed out later, even if she had grown a conscience, even if she had tried to help me now, it didn't erase the fact that she had been part of the foundation that built the hell I was standing in. I lowered the phone slowly, inhaling through the burn in my chest. You were part of this, I said quietly. Whether you stayed or left later doesn't change the fact that you stood beside her when she started. You helped her build the weapon she used to sacrifice me. Lena didn't argue. She just let out a sob, raw, shaking, broken, and whispered the words that told me everything I needed to know. I never meant for you to be the collateral damage. I cared about you long before any of this. I just didn't realize until it was too late. Her confession hung in the air like smoke, bitter and dense, and that was the moment something inside me hardened. Not cruelty, not revenge yet, but clarity. For a long time after Lena's confession, the house felt unbearably small, like the walls were pushing inward one breath at a time. She sat on the edge of the couch with her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with quiet, uneven breaths. But I couldn't go to her. Not yet. Every instinct in me wanted answers, structure, something that would let me understand where her truth began and where the lies ended. But the truth was simpler and far colder. Understanding didn't matter anymore. Whether Lena had joined willingly, whether she'd been manipulated, whether she'd backed out for moral reasons or self-preservation, none of it changed the fact that she had helped build the weapon my wife eventually used to destroy my life. And now the consequences were at my feet, my reputation hanging by a thread, and I was standing in the middle of a battlefield with no allies I could trust. But if there was anything the last few days had taught me, it was that my wife and Lena, both of them, had made an identical mistake. They thought I was harmless. They mistook quiet for blind compliance, steadiness for weakness, patience for stupidity. They believed I was someone who reacted instead of acted, someone who would drown in shock while they rearranged the world around me. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I finally realized I didn't owe either of them another moment of hesitation or grief. I stood up slowly, walked to the window, and pulled the blinds back an inch, staring at the quiet street outside. You said she was planning to disappear, I said calmly, my tone so even it startled even me. You said the people she worked with won't want loose ends. Lena lifted her head, her eyes glassy, her voice hoarse. That's why you need my help, she whispered. You don't know the system she built. You don't know the men involved. You don't know what she's capable of. I turned to her, and she flinched when she saw the expression on my face. The calmness, the clarity, the lack of the emotional chaos that had been consuming me just hours earlier. You keep talking like I'm the one who needs protecting, I said, but you still don't understand that she made one crucial mistake. Lena straightened slowly, uncertainty flickering across her face. What mistake? She asked. I stepped closer, lowering my voice to something steady and deliberate. She assumed she was the smartest person in the room. She assumed she covered every angle. She assumed she could control every variable. But she never once considered that someone might fight back with the same precision she used to build this scheme. Lena's breath stuttered. What are you saying? What are you planning? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached for the stack of printed documents on the table, the burner phone, the cloud backups we had accessed. I laid everything out neatly, creating a timeline, messages dated months apart, bank statements, chats between my wife and her clients, and screenshots of Lena's early involvement. I wasn't looking at them as a devastated husband anymore. I was looking at them the way someone builds a case file. When I finally spoke, my voice didn't shake. You said I'm implicated, I said. You said they'll try to make me the scapegoat. But the only reason they can do that is because all of the evidence is scattered, pieces that point in different directions, pieces no one has put together yet. So I'm going to put it together for them. I'm going to organize every file, every connection, every message, and then I'm going to make sure the right people see it before she has a chance to disappear. Lena shook her head, pushing up from the couch. You don't understand, she said, her voice rising in panic. If you go to the police without context, without protection, they'll assume the worst. They'll drag you into this mess before they untangle her part. You can't just dump this into the system. You need someone to guide you through it. The desperation in her voice almost sounded protective, but I couldn't trust it. Not fully. Not anymore. I'm not going to the police, I said. Not yet. I'm going to the people she scammed. The ones with money, lawyers, connections. The ones who already want retribution. I'll give them the structure they need. The names, the timeline, the network. I'll make it impossible for her to run without tripping every alarm she spent years avoiding. Lena stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for my arm. You're playing with fire, she whispered. These men aren't gentle. They've been humiliated. Some of them invested more than money. If you hand them this, they'll tear her apart. I met her eyes without flinching. Good. The silence that followed was thick and electric, stretching between us like a tight wire. She stared at me like she was seeing someone new, someone she wasn't prepared for. You're not the man I thought you were, she whispered. I leaned in just slightly, holding her gaze with a steadiness I didn't know I had until now. No, I said. I'm not the man she thought I was. For the next several hours, I worked like someone possessed. I combed through every file, every note, every message, connecting dots with a precision I didn't know I had. Lena hovered nearby, torn between fear and guilt, occasionally offering details about names or timelines when I pressed her. And though she tried to help, there was distance between us now, cold, undeniable distance that formed the moment her earlier lies surfaced. When I was finally done structuring everything, I sat back and stared at the binder I had created. A binder that could destroy her. A binder that could implicate Lena too if I wanted it to. And the terrifying truth? Part of me didn't care. Part of me was ready to burn it all down. Lena approached slowly, her voice fragile. What are you going to do with it? She asked. I closed the binder with deliberate slowness. I'm going to send it, I said. Not anonymously, not quietly. I'm going to make it loud. I'm going to make it messy. I'm going to make sure her entire operation collapses before she can vanish. The fear that flashed across Lena's face wasn't fear for herself anymore. It was fear of what I was becoming. You're turning into something dangerous, she whispered. You're turning into someone she won't see coming. I looked at her, my voice steady. Good. And in that moment, for the first time since she walked out smirking, I felt the burn of revenge settle into something razor-sharp and unstoppable. The next 48 hours passed in a way I can only describe as controlled fire. Slow, deliberate, but burning everything it touched. I didn't lash out, didn't scream, didn't crumble under the weight of the betrayal. Instead, I became something quieter and far more dangerous. Decisive. I contacted the men my wife had manipulated, not with emotion, but with precision. I reached out to the banker she'd charmed into helping her disguise transfers. I forwarded everything to an investigator one of the victims recommended, a man described to me as the kind of person who hunts down truth like it owes him money. I didn't send anything anonymously. I attached my full name, my address, my explanation, my timeline. For the first time since she left, the story was no longer something she could control. Lena hovered in the background through all of it. She watched me work with this mixture of awe and fear, never sure if she should stay silent or try to stop me. Several times she opened her mouth as if to speak and then closed it again, her throat working the way someone swallows down things they don't know how to say. On the second night, when I finally shut the binder and exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours, she whispered from behind me, "You know once this starts, there's no undoing it." I turned to her, and she looked impossibly small in that moment, as if she too was standing on the edge of a drop she couldn't see the bottom of. "Good," I said simply. She flinched, not because of harshness, but because she understood I meant it. By the third morning, the fallout had already begun. My phone exploded with calls, investigators wanting details, the scammed men confirming receipt of the files, the banker realizing he was now implicated. Every single call pushed the avalanche forward, and for once none of it touched me the way I expected it to. I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel guilt. I felt something sharp and clean, a sense of justice finally shifting in my direction. Lena watched the transformation in complete, unsettled silence. Just after noon, as I was finalizing the last batch of materials to send out, a car pulled into the driveway, a sleek black one I didn't recognize. Lena stiffened immediately, her eyes snapping toward me. "It's her," she whispered, her voice tight. "It has to be." I stood slowly, the same calm settling over me that had carried me through every decision in the last few days. There was no trembling, no panic, just a strange, steady readiness that felt like stepping outside myself. A moment later, my wife walked through the door as if she still lived there, her expression composed, almost bored, but with a crack of desperation behind her eyes. She shut the door hard enough that the picture frames rattled. "What the hell did you do?" she said, her voice trembling beneath its practiced calm. "I know you sent something out. People are calling me. Do you have any idea how dangerous this is?" She moved closer, her steps sharp, calculated, but her smirk, God, that smirk she always wore when she thought she could outtalk any problem, was weaker now, trembling at the edges. I didn't back away. I didn't yell. I didn't give her the emotional fuel she came expecting. I simply folded my arms and said, "I told the truth." Her jaw tightened, and she tried to summon the same composure she always carried, the one she used to manipulate, to charm, to control. "You have no idea what you've involved yourself in," she hissed. "These men, these people, they don't forgive mistakes. You think exposing me makes you some kind of hero? You think they'll thank you? They'll blame you. They'll drag you down with me." Behind her, Lena stood frozen, her face pale, her hands trembling at her sides. My wife finally noticed her, and her expression twisted. "So she told you," she spat. "Of course she did. She's always been weak, always needed someone to follow. I should have known she'd cling to you once she realized I was leaving." "Stop," I said quietly. It was just one word, softly spoken, but it cut through her tirade like a blade. She froze, staring at me as if she didn't recognize the man standing in front of her. I stepped forward, my voice steady, almost gentle. "You spent years believing you were untouchable. You built this elaborate world and convinced yourself you were smarter than everyone in it, but you forgot one thing." Her eyes narrowed, and she tried to retrieve that smirk, but it faltered. "Forgot what?" she demanded. I leaned in, not threatening, not angry, just speaking a truth she could no longer outrun. "You thought you knew me." For the first time since I met her, I watched her confidence fracture. Her shoulders stiffened, her breath caught, and something like genuine fear flickered across her face. "This isn't over," she muttered, taking a step back. "You don't know what's coming." "You're right," I said. "I don't. But I do know what already happened, and so does everyone else now." She stared at me, opening her mouth as if to argue, but she stopped herself. There was no winning here anymore, no plan B, no graceful exit. She realized it slowly, painfully, in front of both of us. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out of the house. But this time, she didn't smirk. Later that evening, when the dust settled just enough for silence to creep back between the walls, an email arrived from a well-known investigative documentary company. They had received the materials from one of the victims. They wanted to talk. They wanted the story. They wanted my story. Lena read the email over my shoulder, her breath soft against my skin, and whispered, "You're really doing this, aren't you?" I turned to her, feeling something close to peace for the first time in weeks. "Yes," I said. "I'm done being part of her story." She nodded slowly, a mixture of remorse, admiration, and something warmer flickering in her eyes. Then she asked quietly, "How do you feel?" I walked to the doorway, the same doorway she once walked out of Smirking, and I looked at the empty space where my wife once stood. And for the first time, without forcing it, I felt the corner of my mouth lift into a small, controlled, unmistakable smirk. "I feel," I said slowly, "like she finally knows who she was dealing with."